Hello, welcome to another TOG chat, uh, fall edition as we transition out of summer. I think we're right back in it. I'm sure all of you are right back in it as well. But welcome. I'm Robert Osborne, principal of the Osborne Group. I'm joined by my colleague Laurel McCombs. Uh, Hello. So today, Laurel, we discussed talking a little bit about foundations. You and I, yeah, I think it's a popular topic, and we did a popular workshop on it at AFP Icon, and then over the summer as well, also for AFP. And I love talking about this because I feel like it's one of those areas that what we're taught is that there's just a big distance between what we're taught and how things actually work. So I actually really love talking about this topic.
Yeah, I'm excited. And it's funny because I also think we don't tend to talk about foundations a lot because there are a lot of rules in place around how we engage with foundations. Some of them are real and some of them aren't, which I think we'll talk about a lot today. But I think because people tend to be like, oh no, I don't need coaching or support on a foundation. They provide me guidelines, right? Like I don't, but we talk a lot with clients about individual giving and planned giving and other things because there's no guidelines out there, right? Like your big major gift supporters in your community aren't handing you kind of deadlines and sheets to fill out. So but I think to your point, there are just all of these things that we're taught, and I don't even know who taught. Like I look back on my career, I don't even know who taught me these things. I think some things are things that people do tell us. I think some things are just things we make up. And then we have like confirmation bias, right? So I'm like, I think this is true. And then I find signs in the world that like confirm that I'm right about that. But yeah, so I'm excited today to maybe debunk a few of those rules and misconceptions and yeah, dive into this a little bit more. So yeah, I'd love to hear kind of, we talked about a lot in our session that we did for AFP, but I know I had some favorite things that we talk about, but I'm curious kind of where you would pick to start the conversation.
Yeah, I think yeah. So I think for me, it's about the guidelines, just as you talked about. Like to me, that's the area that I think is taken very much as gospel and immutable. The immutable rules of foundations are back in my day printed at the foundation center, and then it was on a little CD-ROM, and and then it was on a website, and now it's behind a paywall on a website as well. But this understanding that there are guidelines, that foundations put those guidelines out, and that they are immutable. They cannot be changed. They cannot be discounted. Whereas they're very bendable lots of times, and even often breakable lots of times as well. And so I do remember in my career where I learned all this. It was at the Foundation Center, and it put a real primacy on those guidelines and on writing itself. And we can talk about where writing sort of fits in with this as well. But this belief that the guidelines are the guidelines. When in fact I discovered throughout my career that some of the largest gifts that I've got were in total opposition to the stated guidelines of the foundation. And I would say that wasn't infrequent. I would say that that was probably 50% of the time. And the thing to remember, I think, about foundations is that just like you, they're trying to achieve something out there in the world. Like they have a vision. Hopefully you have a vision. You're trying to achieve some specific outcomes over the next few years. They also are trying to achieve some specific outcomes over the next few years. Unlike you, who probably hold up in your conference room to decide on what that is, they probably headed off to a nice island somewhere to decide. But they decide they did, and then the guidelines are very much the translation of what that vision is. So we are trying to do these things in the world. This is our mission. This is our vision. What is the best way for us to do that? Let's write that down and make some rules and some guidelines. And that's sort of what we see. But what they're trying to do is they are trying to achieve some specific outcomes. And if we can understand what those outcomes are, if we can talk to them and ask them, what are you trying to achieve with your philanthropy? What are your priorities right now, today, that you're trying to achieve? What outcomes you're trying to achieve? If we can sort of understand what's behind the guidelines, then possibly we can, propose something that maybe doesn't fit the guidelines, but does fit the vision and mission of that particular foundation. And there might be flexibility there because they are not there just to be bureaucrats, right? They're there to achieve some kind of end. And if we can understand what that end is and we can propose a different way of doing it or a different way of thinking about it, then perhaps they will bend the guidelines in some way or make an exception, or choose to interpret them in a way that, technically, you might look at it or I might look at it and say, okay, that doesn't feel like we fit the guidelines, but it fitted enough in for their own internal purposes, that they didn't have to, justify it, or they were able to justify it in some particular way. So that's worth exploring. I think you'll find that very often that there is flexibility, and then sometimes you'll find out that there isn't, and that's okay. That's okay too. And lots of times people come to me and said, you know what, Bob, the guidelines, in fact, are the guidelines, and you need to follow them. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But no one's ever gotten mad at me for asking or trying to explore that. So for me, that's probably my favorite one, and I think the one that people are most surprised to hear about. What's your favorite?
Well, I mean, you just kind of transitioned really well into my favorite because you said no one's ever gotten mad at me for asking, right? And I think that, I look back at my career and I think about how many times I had questions ahead of time, but there wasn't like a formal, if you have questions, here's the, when we're going to have the Q&A, or here's where you submit them. But I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this. Or when I got a no, and I was like, wow, I really thought we were a good fit. I think about the number of times that I just didn't think I was allowed, right, to reach out. I didn't think, and you see a lot of folks out there who have like do not call on their website. And yeah, if somebody says do not call, do not call. But we'll talk about this in a minute. Like there are other ways to get to folks besides just cold calling them, right? And I think I always think like if I knew then what I knew now, like the what I would tell Laurel then is like pick up the phone and just call them and ask for 15 minutes to have a conversation. And I think you get really good information. You get really good information pre-submission of a proposal that will make your proposal stronger, that will make your proposal stick out because when they read it, they're going to be like, oh, that was Laurel that called. She was super cool, right? Because that's what people think when they talk to me on the phone for 15 minutes. But but I think like the pre-submission, there's a real benefit to reaching out, making sure that are asking any questions you have, or kind of just checking in that what you're proposing is in fact really aligned with what they're trying to achieve. And then post submission, right? When you, as particularly when you get that no, being able to just pick up the phone and say, I'd love to get some feedback. You're going to get good feedback. You're going to, maybe you didn't communicate your theory of change very well and it wasn't clear what you were going to achieve. Maybe the breadth or the scope wasn't expressed clearly. And there is a really good chance that should some other pot of money open up at some point, that they come back. I have clients who have done the follow-up call and a few months later had a program officer call and say, hey, actually, we just had a pot of money open up and we'd love to fund the project, right? And that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't had a conversation about it. And so I also say to people, within a lot of foundation proposal guidelines, right? There's these 150 word limits or 500 word limits, and the questions are always worded weirdly, and it feels like multiple questions ask the same thing, and it always feels a little awkward to really try to express yourself in those kind of structured formats. But when you get to just have a conversation with somebody, you really have a chance to share your passion, to share your vision, to really just express how important the work you're doing is and what you're going to achieve. And I think that's a really great opportunity and leads to really good relationships, right? So this is the other thing that you and I talk about with foundations, which is not unlike individual donors. This is not just a transactional, I send you a proposal, you send me money, I send you a report, and maybe I get money again, right? The more we can build partnership and relationship building into our foundation process, the more we're going to succeed because we are just that much closer to folks. People trust us more, right? Because they know who we are, they've seen us in action. So I know you talk a lot about kind of the benefits of building relationships. I'd love to hear a little bit of your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, and I think I know the origin of this, but I think it's been passed along. I remember when I first started my career, there was like the Foundation Center put out this book guideline to foundations, and it was all about writing. And if you did the training there, it was all about writing, and very little, if anything, about relationships. And I think most organizations, probably with your top funders, have some level of relationships, but also probably send out a bunch of proposals where that relationship is maybe you've talked on the phone one time, right, or twice, but you don't really have that relationship. And there's a tendency, I think, to overemphasize writing and underemphasize relationships, whereas it really should be the other way around. Like if I send a proposal, I kind of want to know it's already mostly a fait accompli, that this is the formal way of saying that, like, I'm asking you for the money. But much like with major gifts, like there's a lot of things that go into it before then. And then yes, you do the ask, but you kind of know you're going to get the money if you've done a good job, because it's not the first time you've talked about it. Like you said, you've had these relationships with people. And I think people, it really is a who kind of business. And what I mean by that is not that, if you know a bunch of trustees or program officers, that they're just siphoning money to you because they like you and they're friends with you. It's not that at all. Believe me, I've tried that. It doesn't work. But to your point, that they trust you. If they know you, they trust you. They know that you're gonna follow through. So we can have this beautiful proposal that we've written, right? But how do I know that you can deliver on that proposal? How do I know that you can deliver well on that proposal? When I weigh your proposal against all these other proposals that are also maybe have a lot of merit, how do I know who I should give money to or not? And a lot of that's going to be based on your relationship, because you'll have an opportunity to talk to them more. They're going to understand what you're trying to do better than if you just send in a proposal or have talked once or twice. They're going to be better advocates for you, because they have to convince other people. It's rare, like for these larger foundations or even smaller ones, but that are formal, where there's a board and program officers, that the decision to give you money lays with one person, right? Like it might up to a certain amount depending on the size of the foundation, but most of the time you have to convince multiple people. So is this person going to be the best advocate for you? Do they understand you? Are they going to go to the mat for you if there's pushback? Maybe if they really understand the project and believe in it and have bought into it and have talked to you, and so you've really provided them with all the information they need to be an advocate that can push back, or is willing to expend some personal capital within their own organization on your behalf. And so it really does boil down to, the more people you know and the stronger those relationships are with those people, the better chance you have. Again, not because they're going to do you any favors, but because they're going to understand your work the best, and they're going to be the best advocates. And you'll have multiple people, in that room, so to speak, that are pulling for you. So it's good. You have to have good writing, and that, not that that doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter nearly as much as people think. It matters the same way you would want anything that you write to reflect well on you and your organization. But and it matters in the sense that some people within that organization, that may be the only thing that they see about you, and so that it does need to stand up on its own. But the relationship part of this, I think, is just so much more important. So
I I think about when I was in my 20s, I spent a very brief time as a program officer for a small health conversion foundation, and it was small. You know, I think the first grant cycle that I ran, I think we were giving away like a whopping 100K total, and in the form of probably maybe five to $10,000 grants. You know, this was not a big foundation by any means, and you know, we had the proposal. You know, we had the RFPs. We got proposals in. I did my due diligence. I talked to folks. I got things, answered questions. I was trying to be a good program officer and be proactive in reaching out to people who submitted proposals. I put together the recommendations for the board and was like, this is great, that I'm going to take this, and they're going to be like, this looks great. And it was the hardest board meeting I've ever sat through in my entire life, because
Mm,
every single board member in that room had some group that either I had chosen not to give any funding to, or I had not allotted them enough. And they were all different. All 10 of those board members in that room had a different group that they had come to bat for that night and were batting hard for them. And I had to completely redo the recommendations, right? And I was so blindsided by that. Like no one had prepared me that the board was going to do that, or be as forceful as they were about it. But yeah, it was such a lesson to me. I was like, oh, it doesn't matter what I objectively think based on these proposals, because there's a whole bunch of people who also have greater decision making authority than me,
yeah.
who are going to come back and shut it down. So yeah, in life, IRL, this theory, right? Like it's real. And the one thing you talk a lot about that I think is really important is, you talk about getting ahead of these relationships, right? That it's not just, because I do think a lot of folks are doing their research. They find a foundation that's aligned, and the proposals due next week, and then they submit the proposal and cross their fingers and close their eyes and hope it makes it through. And I think there is something to be said for getting ahead of your research, putting people on the list who you may not apply to for a year or 2 years, and then take that time getting to know those folks, trying to reach out to them, trying to get in front of them before you ever plan to submit a proposal, so that when you do, you already have that relationship. Like you said, it's kind of fait accompli, that it's just gonna happen, right? And so I think there, again, just the way we approach proposals tends to just be, because it's so deadline driven, we just tend to be like, oh, well, that proposal is not due until March, so I'm not even going to think about them till February, right? Whereas if it's not due till March, ooh, I have some time to reach out, maybe try to chat with somebody, and get some things done ahead of time.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think like a lot of things in fundraising, it's the difference between like doing fundraising from a category versus like running a program. So most organizations or many organizations will, fundraise from institutional donors. And to your point, right, they just kind of, as deadlines come up, they submit, maybe have some conversations, but it's very like pegged to that deadline, and you sort of work your way backwards. And you're not really focusing on it necessarily until you're forced to over report, or you're kind of leading into that ask. When, well, for most organizations, you can kind of look at the universe of foundations and predict, like, here are foundations that may be supportive of my work. Maybe I have something I can specifically ask for them, ask them for now. Maybe I don't. But what I can do today is start reaching out to them. What I can do today is start mapping relationships. Like, who do I know that is on their program officer list? Who do I know that's on their board of trustees? Who do I know that's just on their staff? Creating those lists, circulating those lists to your stakeholders, finding out, 'cause it's such an easy ask, right? If I know someone at a foundation and someone say, hey, can you contact this person for me? And as long as they're like I can reasonably believe that they might be interested. That's the easiest ask in the world. It's not like calling your best friend to give money for something, or like these foundations exist to do this. So easy way to engage me, easy ask for me. You can start to map all those relationships. And then yeah, you're reaching out to them proactively so that when you, like to your point, when you need them, that relationship has already been built. And then the other thing to be doing too, like I think when this is done at its strongest, you're not just an applicant, but you're really getting them to come to you. So thinking about what do you know? What does your organization know that other people don't know? And how can I put that out there in the world? I think a good analogy for program officers is that they're like beat reporters, right? They they know a lot about the beat that they're covering, but they can't know everything. And they rely on the people who are doing it day to day, people like you, who kind of know what's going on. And if you can kind of supply that information to them, they will come to you. They will start to see you as the expert on X. And when they need to know information about X, they'll come to you because that's the only way that they can really get a broad sense of all the things that's going on in whatever program area they're covering. So thinking about that, holding panel discussions, holding briefings, sending out reports, whatever you think might be useful for them to know, I think is a really powerful way of them of getting them to come to you and really running something that's proactive, and that's like a true program, and not, to your point, Laurel, just kind of, when I need the money, then I start thinking about it, and usually or often that might be too late to really put my best foot forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And and speaking of, kind of creating true kind of partnerships and relationships, I think it's worth noting stewardship, right? I mean, I don't know that you and I ever have a conversation where we don't talk about stewardship to some
All the
extent.
time.
And I do think that a lot of folks see stewardship to foundations as like the report that is required per your letter of agreement. Right. And it's like, I have a 6 month and a 12-month report due, and that's my stewardship. And I think it's really worth including your foundations within your broader stewardship calendar and plan, including them on your, the impact reports you send to other donors, including them in, if you're going to do a stewardship event, and, invite your program officers to that. If you're going to, whatever you're going to be doing for other folks, include your foundations in that, and then maybe even do a few things throughout the year that are specific stewardship, impact driven stewardship touches for your foundation specifically, right? And again, just get opportunities for them to see your programs in action, opportunities for them to convince themselves of how great your work is and how important the impact you're having is, so that the less you have to continue to convince them, right? They'll start to convince themselves, and that's really powerful. So, and then I will just circle back to one thing. We did get a question in when we did this session for the AFP Summer Series. That was kind of like, look, I've tried every which way to do this relationship mapping, to, try to figure things out. I would, first of all, my favorite Bob Osborne word, I would first interrogate that a little bit. That, I think sometimes have you shown the list to your board of directors? Have you shown it to your full staff? Have you talked to other organizations? Like, do look at who they have funded. And if you have any partners or friends who are at those organizations, go talk to them. Like, what worked for you? How did you get your foot in the door? I think we see ourselves as competitors when we're all happy to chat with each other, right, about these things, especially when it comes to foundations. So first and foremost, like, if you really are having a hard time, nobody's calling you back, nobody's returning your emails, because I know that's real. Like, really, like, kind of go back to that relationship mapping. Have you touch base with everyone? And then look, there's gonna everything we've talked about today. This is what we hope most foundations are true for. Most foundations, not going to be true for all. There are some foundations that are just incredibly insular, and just do what they do, and they're not going to talk to you, and they're not going to respond to your email, and you're going to say, Bob and Laurel, you were wrong. And I'm going to say that that's the exception to the rule. I'm going to hope that that's the exception to the rule.
Yeah, no, I think we all know that, yes, foundations can be incredibly frustrating in the way they approach things. And I'm sure every person who is listening to this TOG chat can tell us a story about some terrible foundation. So to your point, yeah, that we're not invalidating that, and we empathize with that. But what we are suggesting is that is more flexibility maybe than we're taught to believe, and I think significantly more flexibility than we're taught to believe. But they just have to think about your relationship with the foundation slightly differently than maybe you have in the past. And so along the line, like the last thing I would like for folks to leave folks with, and this is true not just for foundations, but I think true for any wealthy person, entity of whatever kind. It's what I call they're still rich. And what I mean by that is, oh, the economy is a little bit down. They're still rich. Oh, there's more competition out there. They're still rich. The job market report's not good. They're still rich. And what I mean by that is foundations are required to give away a percentage of their total assets every year. I think is it 5.5 or 5%? I forget. It's one of those. Which is like that is what's required by law. But that's the floor. Like they can go above that if that's what they would like to do, and they often do that for something that they care about. And this is all just to say, like, okay, the economy's bad right now. Right now, a lot of foundations are pulling back. They're adjusting maybe how they're thinking about their giving. Look, that's their prerogative, but that shouldn't stop you from asking. If you have something that is worthy and worthwhile and is going to achieve real outcomes and impact, you can still propose something outside their guidelines, outside of their normal range. They can make the decision, if that is what they choose to do, to give away 8% this year, to give away 10% this year, to give away 6% this year, to make a one-time gift to you. I can name lots. I don't want to call out any organizations or people, but I can think of lots of examples of where somebody got a big gift in recognition of whatever. So just keep that in mind, and that like nothing that you're asking like changes the basic economic situation of that particular foundation, and they can decide they're deciding to do things a certain way, but they could decide to do things a different way. And I think that's the critique that a lot of folks have of foundations. They're like, in time of crisis, why not give away more? I think a lot of us have felt like it's raining now. Why not? You know, the rainy day is here. What are we what are we saving it for? And again, that's their decision, but never hurts to ask. Do you have anything
And
you'd like to leave people with?
and I'll just say, I did think of you the other day, Bob. I was as the Chronicle. If anybody out there doesn't believe us, today is September 5th, 2025. Just last week, Chronicle of Philanthropy posted an article that there is more money sitting in foundations than there has ever been ever. And I think it was like 1 point something trillion dollars, and all because of the stock market, right? Like there's just more money sitting in foundations right there now than there ever has been. And I heard Bob Osborne's voice in my head saying they're still rich. I said, that's right, that's right, Bob. And so, again, I think, yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and I think people are still just trying to figure out how they're responding to the uncertainty. So there may be holds and pauses with some foundations in terms as they figure out how they're going to respond and if they're going to give more this year, and if right. But that doesn't mean you stop trying to reach out and have the conversation, because that conversation you have with them could influence the decision they end up making about how they're going to approach this. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure we justified that it's still rich with actual data from Chronicle of Philanthropy that is in fact true.
Well, I think this has been a good conversation. I always enjoy this topic because it feels like one of those topics that's super practical, right? Like hopefully hope all of you listening take away some practical advice, and maybe let's consider approaching your foundation work a little differently. But thanks again, Laurel, for joining me on another Friday afternoon to chat about development. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about something else. If you have any specific requests, topics, you can always email us at mail@theosborngroup.com, or if we can be helpful to you in some way, you can email us there as well. But until then, we will sign off. All right. Thanks, Laurel.
Thanks.